Wonderful. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our conversation today. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for making the transition to online versus in-person format. We were, of course, all very much looking forward to meeting Oleksandra in person, but such is life, it didn't work out. And fortunately, we have this technology that allows us to gather together in this format and to hear this very interesting and very important lecture. Before I introduce Oleksandra, I just want to sincerely thank Elizabeth Amrian and the Center for the Study of Europe at Boston University for supporting this lecture, for organizing everything, and for making the entire process completely seamless. My name is Lana Sloutsky, and I'm visiting assistant professor in the Department of Art and Architecture at BU. And I am teaching a class on Russian and Ukrainian art this semester. And I invited Oleksandra to speak both to my class and to the wider BU community because she is an extraordinary speaker and a wonderful spokesperson for Ukrainian art and culture now in the United States. So Oleksandra is the acting director of the Odesa Museum of Fine Arts. She is also the leader of the NGO Museum for Change that's currently actively fundraising to protect Ukrainian cultural institutions. She's also an acting member of the Odesa City Council. She's an activist, she's a volunteer, and she is, as I already mentioned, tirelessly promoting Ukrainian culture and cultural heritage in this country now. Since the beginning of the war in February, Oleksandra and her family, her son and her husband, have moved to the Boston area. And here she, of course, continues her tireless efforts. And over the last 6 months, she has presented at many institutions, both large and small, on a variety of topics related to Ukrainian art and culture. And I know that we're all very much looking forward to your lecture today. It's relevant to many departments, many different kinds of people at BU. And I'd like to formally thank you for coming. It's an honor and it's a pleasure to have you here. And we're very much looking forward to your talk.
Hi, thank you, Lana. I apologize for switching to Zoom. I was really looking forward to meeting you. And I think that it was very important for me to see the representative of students, audience, especially BU. It is a very untrivial job for me to present about something related to Ukraine in terms of one presentation, because I really want to speak all of it and to speak about all the Ukraine, the history, modernity and future. But I will try to make it short and not to overload you with the details. This kind of approach is the first one, is the first time that I've prepared this kind of approach to speaking about Ukrainian culture. It's more related to the institutions that are actively working during the war, not only for itself, but for the whole community of museum professionals and working together to protect and preserve Ukrainian heritage. But I will start with the museum where I work as a director, currently remotely. It's the Odesa Fine Arts Museum that was actually founded in the 1890s and opened its doors 123 years ago. And it was closed only two times since that. It was during the World War II and after February 24th. And this is the postcard about the museum exposition. And here we can see both, we can see definitely Venera. It is a copy of the statue. And in the collection of this museum, you could see both Western, Eastern, all kinds of art, and also Ukrainian and Russian art. Unfortunately, after the revolution of 1917, the communist revolution, the museum collection was divided in two parts. And the part that left in the museum when I work right now in the Odesa Fine Arts Museum was only and mostly Russian. Everything else was relocated to a different museum that was opened in a couple of years after that. And by this act, we saw how the Soviet Union and the communist administration sealed this frame for the art that is ours and that is Russian, marking the territory as territory of Russian culture. And also by making a statement that there is, of course, there is all kinds of different art, but it's an alien art. It's a different art. And by this, they were trying to create this distance between the art of Soviet Union, which was very often connected more with the Russian art than any other population or nationality of people for the Soviet Union, and the other art of the world. However, we know that this is impossible, or all kinds of art is related. And that was one of the tools of propaganda, one of the tools of colonial management that were used through museums to shape people's minds. And here, this is the pictures from 20s, from the museum exposition, where each room would have a name that was also shaped in a way of like art of the times of feudalism in Russian Empire, like speaking about feudalism, like looking at the art through this, from the perspective of communists, very, very, very bad thing. Or the next whole is the art of the bureaucracy of Russian Empire. And each room had a name that was not linked to the art itself, but that was linked to the political propaganda line that was established by Soviet Union authorities. And there was also a room devoted to art of times of Pushkin. That is how they called it. And there was a lot of Pushkin in that museum. And this was also part of the statement, making the, and it would happen in many Ukrainian museums and in other museums of former Soviet Union, making sure that all of the territories are connected with the center, with this cultural bridge where Russian culture and milestones of Russian culture, such as Pushkin, are this bridge between center and other colonized territories. In 30s, the museum was changing constantly. We have plenty of pictures how exposition changed through the time. And we could easily see when it got the final vision, where the main part of it would be speaking about peasants and workers, how bad their life was. And the second part of the narrative was how good is life of Soviet people and the bright future that we have ahead. So during this time, the museum was mostly speaking to the audience, speaking to the local community about these two narratives. And here we can see a director who was later, however, he was a convinced communist. He was murdered by KGB in the end of 30s during the purges that happened in all of the territories of the Soviet Union. And then for a very long time, exposition of museum didn't change. It spoke about these two ideas of how bad life was before communism, how good life is after communism. It was very Russian through both parts of this narrative. And when we finally gained our independence and Ukraine became independent in 1990 first, actually this heritage stayed with our museums for longer and for a very, very long time. In some museums, it was like this even now. before the February 24th. This is the 4 pictures from the Odesa Fine Arts Museum in 2018. This is how this collection would be $500 million only in this room. And the ceiling was so broken that whenever it rained, you could see all this water and buckets everywhere. And that is when a new director and new team, including me, joined the museum. Here we can see Oleksandra Kovalchuk, and this is part of the core new team of the museum. And in a couple of years, we started working on decolonizing the museum exposition, about speaking about Ukraine and Ukrainian art, speaking about freedom and other values that are very important for Ukrainians. And during a couple of years, museum was changed completely from this very, very pro-Russian narrative to a very, very strong Ukrainian voice, and thinking and seeing this collection through the decolonization optics. And Oleksandra Kovalchuk was a visionary and a prominent Ukrainian artist. And aside of working with the exposition, we did a lot of events that would break this statics of Soviet museum, this heritage in people's minds, like the museum, the place where everything is very static. We did some concerts over there, and one of them actually was Hammerman and Stigwin viruses, where you can see this Lviv group. They are singing in a punk rock kind of style, and they're wearing a very provocative costumes. And it was kind of the last final statement to push people's minds that museum is not about statics, it's about the life, about the communities, about the change, and about the history also. And during this time, as it was obvious that museum is very pro-Ukrainian and that we give a very strong Ukrainian voice in Odessa, and for local politicians who are linked to political powers from Russia and founded by Russian Federation for a very long time, the head of this political power was Viktor Medvedchuk, who was recently exchanged for 200 Ukrainian warriors, and he was extradited to Russia. So he was the head of this pro-Russian party that was trying to speak about conservative values, Russian language, Russian culture, Russian heritage, and Ukraine and Odessa and other regions to be part of Russia historically. And they wanted to take down this director. And during a couple of years, we've been fighting with them all the time. They were trying in legal and illegal way to take him down from this position. And eventually they almost did it. And the reply of the local community was enormous. This is the picture from the rally where more than 3,000 people came out to speak, to say that this is director of the museum that we love, that we want to see, and we don't want any politicians to play part in that. This is the museum that we want, this is the museum that we need, this is the director that has to stay at place. And this demonstration, there were actually two, one with 3,000 people, another one with 5,000 people. It was enormous. It was the first time in decades when the local community was so much activated. It was definitely one of the few cases when local community would be so activated to protect cultural institution. And it was very fascinating in its way. And this is the picture of also part of our team, how happy we were at that time. And museum continued working. We protected the director, we protected this new vision of the museum. And we did many, many things. We did movie nights, we did galas. And another important thing, the exposition was changed. And one of the main things Oleksandra Kovalchuk did was exposition about 100 years of Ukrainian art from 1920s to contemporary art, to 2020s, to the contemporary Ukrainian art that would speak about socialistic realism, about all of the stage of development of art in Odessa, Ukraine, and how Soviet Union at that time or other actors were influencing that art development in Odessa and Ukraine. And this was one of the greatest accomplishments. And this is how museum looked before February 24th. It would speak about Ukrainian art from actually 16th century to the most contemporary Ukrainian art. And this is the picture of one of the rooms that was historically devoted to this art depicting the hard life of peasants. And this is the same room on February 24th when the museum staff was packing up all of this art to send it to safety. And this is the museum exposition right now. What is remarkable, this is the same room where for around 70 years, it was the space to speak Soviet and Russian narrative of the art history and depicted Russian art. And right now, during the war, these same walls contain artworks of the contemporary Ukrainian artists. It's an absolutely different, it's an absolutely positive thing, opposite thing. It's also an important statement. But the team of the museum, after February 24th, we did what we had to do with our collection. And then we started to thinking about other museums, first in Odessa region, in Mykolaiv. And we started to work with international organizations to fundraise, to supply all of the museums with all of the packing materials, with all of the evacuation expenses to help protect these artworks, this heritage that the museums contain, and to relocate it to safety. Besides that, we were working on protecting cultural heritage on the streets of Odessa by making the protective constructions. And this is Daria. She is the chief fundraiser of fundraising department of the Odesa Fine Arts Museum. After February 24, her TikTok kind of changed. Now she speaks all about unpacking all of the medical kits, radioactive defensive kits, and the chemical protection suits, and all things like that. This is the unfortunate thing that happened, and the new skills that we had to gain after February 24th. And during this time, we managed to gain about $700,000 to protect collections in Ukrainian museums. And we helped 65 institutions and a lot of museum professionals. Then I want to jump to the NGO, the Museum of Contemporary Art of Ukraine, which the museum itself doesn't exist. It existed only as a statement of Ukrainian cultural managers who were demanding the government to open finally the museum of official governmental National Museum of Contemporary Ukrainian Art that would speak about the art of independence from 95, for the past 30 years. And this is the team of this NGO from the first days of war. What they did, they've started to collect money and to give out money to museum professionals, to cultural managers, to artists, to help them to get to safety or to do other things they needed. And also they've prepared a huge depository of war art that was made by different Ukrainian artists. They're making this storage to keep it protected, to contain it, and to speak about it when the war is over. And these are also remarkable results that they gain in two dimensions: supporting cultural managers and collecting and protecting the contemporary art of war. Then the next institution I will speak about is the Museum of Maidan, of the Revolution of Dignity that took place 8 years ago, 2014, maybe you remember that. And this is the architectural project of this museum, but it wasn't yet built. This is the exposition as it is now, because even during this revolution, this Maidan movement on the streets of Kiev, there was a lot of art going on over there. A lot of prominent Ukrainian artists will go there and paint on the cascades on the helmets and on other things that were used to protect Protestants at the streets. And it was very important to contain this memory and to relocate it to the museum. Briefly after February 24th, they've started to work on protecting monuments in the streets of Kiev. They've started to talking to international partners to bring in packing materials and other materials that would be required. And they were constantly delivering those materials to both big and small institutions all over Ukraine, and especially closer to the battle lines. And also the director of this museum, Igor Peshvaiva, and prominent and very, very prominent researcher, museum worker, and the leader. He was traveling to all of the locations that were deoccupied to find out what local museums, what is the situation with the museums, were collections robbed or not. He was the first who would document the damage committed to the cultural heritage. And he was the first one to do that. And he also developed, together with UNESCO, they've developed an app to document the destruction. Literally, with your just iPhone, you scan the destruction of some building or monument, and it right away goes as a documentation of the war crimes. Then the Lviv Museum and Memorial it was called the Territory of Terror. It is a relatively new institution that was also opened somewhere 10 years ago, 15 years it was established and as institution, but it opened its doors about 10 years ago. This is how it looks. It is located near the train station in the very complicated, in the tragic territory of Lviv, where a lot of tragedies happened during the 20th century, including it was part of ghetto and part of mass killing sites during the Nazi occupation of Lviv. And also this museum is interesting particularly because it speaks about people who lived in Lviv and around, about their histories. And it speaks about all kinds of terrors that happened over there during the past 100 years. And this is, of course, you can see the relation of the on the entrance of the museum to the Auschwitz and the other camps name. And this is how it used to look during the Nazi occupation. And this is one of the objects in the museum exposition. This is the picture from this ghetto. And this is the orchestra of Lviv orchestra. These are all Jewish musicians, and they're playing the music that was written by a composer also who was also in this ghetto, and it was called A Tango of Death. And this was the music that these hundreds and thousands people would hear when they were moving to the final killing spot, when they were moving towards the execution spot in this ghetto. And they would speak about that. They would speak about this heritage. This is again other pictures. And this looks like maybe the first thing that you would think about when you look at this picture would be a Nazi concentration camp. But actually, the Communist and Soviet Union concentration camps existed long before the first German concentration camp was opened in Germany. And this how they looked, and this how the concentration camp, when we speak about crimes against humanity, crimes against human rights, it would be always the same, pretty much the same thing. Terror looks the same way, even if it is conducted by different ideologies or powers or authorities. And they would speak about all of that, different sides of terror that people who live there, communities who live there, experienced. This is the exhumation of bodies from, actually, I apologize, this is the wrong title to the picture. This is the people who were executed before German army arrived to Lviv, because in 2 years before German army occupied Lviv, it was occupied by Soviet Union, because before that it was part of Poland. And during the communist 2 years in Lviv, it was a huge wave of terror. A lot of thousands of people were murdered, including researchers, scientists, musicians, writers. And it was a huge assault on Ukrainian, and not only Ukrainian, intelligence and bright scholars, scientists, and a lot of people. As German army was approaching to Lviv, people who were detained in these prisons, they were, during a day, they were brutally killed before Soviet army was going out of Lviv. And of course, first thing that Nazis did, they've invited people to see these bodies, and to create this wave of hatred towards the communist Soviet Union, and also, unfortunately, towards the Jewish community who lived there. So this side, they were using this kind of approach to grow hatred among local community. And this is the exhumation of bodies at the Yenivsky concentration camp after the retreat of German army. And this is the also the same thing. They've invited local people to find their relatives and to grow hatred towards the West, actually, at that time, not only towards the National Socialists, but towards the West as itself. So the museums speaks about all of these episodes, and in the center they put people and their identity, their personal histories, personal experience of surviving 20th centuries. And here you can listen to stories of survivors. This is Olga Hanchar, the director of the museums. And on the February 24th, as Lviv was further than from battle lines, she realized with her friends together, other professionals from museum community, that they need to help other Ukrainians, museums professionals, especially who are currently at battle lines or already on the occupied territories. And that was the first thing that they immediately started doing. And during this time, they've helped them by giving them money they used to try to evacuate, and it wasn't very easy. They helped to extradite, literally, museum professionals from occupied territories, and they helped to evacuate collections. Also, another thing, important thing that Olga and her group is doing is that they're participating in multiple events in Europe. And I have to tell you that before February 24, to get from Lviv to Vienna, for example, it will take you 3 hours from your door to the Vienna airport. But now, to travel to any European country, Olga has to spend more than 18 hours only in one part of the path in the bus. And sometimes it takes up to 12 hours on the border to cross the border. And as there is no connection, of course, all of the airports are closed, railroads, everything is very complicated right now. So in order to get out of Ukraine and to speak out for Ukrainian community on different events, Olga is going through a very complicated procedure, which is very hard physically to do. And that's also part of our resistance and part of our common work to speak about Ukrainian culture and about the war crimes that Russia is committing. And this is the picture of Olga and the director of Luhansk Regional History Museum, Olesya Milovanova, an extraordinary museum professional. She was staying in her museum in Kramatorsk while it was already almost captured by Russian forces. And she stayed there because she needed to destroy all of the materials linked to Ukrainian resistance from 2014, from the Maidan time, and warriors who participated in the war that actually started then. And they knew that if Russian forces and the authorities get these lists and materials about people who were in the local people who were in the military, Ukrainian military, or Maidan activists, that would be people they will be imprisoning, torturing, and killing. That's what we saw in Bucha. That's what we saw on many deoccupied territories. I'm sure you saw the pictures of mass graves and new exhumations that happened. And unfortunately, that's exactly what was happening. So her goal was to destroy all materials that could put in danger families or these people or their families. And she was extradited from there by Ukrainian militaries. They were literally taking her away because she tried to stay and continue her work. And that was the last convoy of Ukrainian militaries who departed from Kramatorsk. And on their path, something from my perspective extraordinary happened. They saw the parachutist, the Marine descending on parachute in the field. They were passing by and they stopped, and militaries, they went there. They took this guy in the custody. And then she just opened the door. This idea flashed her mind. She opened the door, she runs into the field. She picks up this parachute and she takes it with her because she realizes that this is her first object of the collection of the new museum. And this is an extremely powerful illustration of this museum worker mindset when you are thinking not only about history, when you are thinking not only about protection of existing objects of culture and history, but you're also feeling this responsibility for containing history that is going on right now, to make sure that people in future generations from now will have some objects to hear these stories of what Ukrainian museums and Ukrainian people are going through right now. So to sum up, I want to say that Ukrainian museum institutions, and this is only a few of the many, and in the first couple of months, we didn't even know who of us, what are we doing? We had no time. We were too busy doing our part. And it took us a couple of months to realize what is going on in different institutions. And museum workers stepped up in our part of this war, of this resistance, showing responsibility, showing cooperation and humanism, putting people in the center and trying to protect as much of people and as much of Ukrainian culture and history and heritage that I'm sure is very important for the world. This is it. Thank you for your attention. I hope that I've managed to deliver some points about what is going on with Ukrainian cultural institutions and Ukrainian museums during this almost 7 months of full-scale invasion of Russian Federation to Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Oleksandra. That was such a beautiful and a poignant presentation. I think so often when we watch the news, obviously and necessarily, the focus is not on the art world. There are other, of course, there are so many sides to this horrible war, but this is, I think, such a wonderful reminder that the cultural institutions in Ukraine, as well as of course here, have such an important role to play. And not only is it the protection of the art that's already there, but also the creation of new material. And the last story that you told about that parachute is just, it sends chills up my spine to think of someone who works in museums. Just so many of us are involved with museums, of having to take it to that next level plus, and then some, right? Is a really, yeah, it sends chills up my spine. So I'm very grateful to you. I have a question. Your organization, I know, has raised a lot of money to support museums and other cultural institutions in the Ukraine. How do you feel, other than the financial support, how do you feel that museums in the West, and I guess particularly in the US, have responded? Have they done enough? Are there exhibits that you're aware of that we should all also be aware of? Are there, I don't know, jobs for museum professionals that are being pushed forth here?
Thank you for your question. In Europe, there are a couple of programs, and museums are hosting the Ukrainian professionals from Ukrainian museums. And there are a lot of grants. There were a lot of grants for different temporary exhibitions that popped up throughout Europe during these 7 months. But as for the museums, it is a harder thing, because the planning of exhibitions and events in American museums goes very far in the future. However, I think that after COVID, now we should adjust to the idea of changing, of change that are permanent, and it is very hard to plan something ahead. However, there is, right, I know that many museums contributed to some materials and pitched in to buy also evacuation materials, packing materials, storage materials for Ukrainian museums. That happened. I know that they're speaking a lot about helping in that direction. I really hope, and I'm trying to get on board some American museum to show a consistent exhibition, blockbuster, about history of Ukrainian art during the past 1,000 years, to show how it developed, and how actually when we look at the art history, we always find out about the history. And if we look at the Ukrainian art history, it would always be about rebel and assault by Russia, and rebel and assault, rebel and assault. It was always like this. So actually, in nearest future, I think in the mid-November, we're opening a small photography exhibition in the Museum of Fine Arts. But I think I wish that local museums could do more to make Ukrainian culture more visible. Unfortunately, Russian culture had a really, really strong voice for many years. And it was a strong voice also in Ukraine, and it was deliberate. And Russia made weapon out of its culture, unfortunately. And that's what we see. So even today, we see a lot of Russian culture in American museums or opera theaters or other institutions. And I wish there was more options, more possibilities to make visible Ukrainian culture, and that would help to explain who we are and why are we fighting and what are we fighting for.
Thank you. I'm sure there are questions from the audience. I have more, but I'd like to open it up to our participants. So maybe someone there has a question. I don't know, Elizabeth, if you can help coordinate, or if, here we go, here we're getting some questions. So Tom Johnson is writing, should I read these questions?
No, I see them.
You see them. Okay, so go ahead, yeah. I should read them. Okay. So would someone please post the names and/or links to organizations dedicated to protecting Ukrainian culture and its institutions?
Yes, actually, this is my fault. I should have prepared in the end of the presentations the QR codes for each institution. I think that I will send an email shortly after this presentation to Elizabeth, and I will ask her to send it to those who were registered to the election. Of course, each institution has a website and a possibility to donate to each institution or to get in touch with.
Mm-hmm. Great. Other questions? If you want to type them, this is to the audience. If you want to type them in the chat, I will gladly read them. Well, in the meantime, maybe I'll ask another question. So you said that in the beginning there were a lot of materials that were sent to the Ukrainian museums, packing materials and such. Is there still a need for that? And I mean, do you know how frequently are you in touch with your colleagues back home? What kinds of things are they saying that they need now?
Right now, we're preparing to the winter. As we can see that during past month or so, Russian Federation is committing new war crimes by hitting civil infrastructure. They're trying to hit all of the heating plants and the energy power stations and things like that. And we're preparing to a very, very cold winter without heating or electricity. And that is what we're preparing right now. There is a demand of different generators, power generators, power banks, things that will help to keep collections protected in case of blackout and things like that. There is also constant need to support museum professionals who are staying in Ukraine and who are serving at this space over there to help the museums. It's not more like packing materials. Now we have new goals and new challenges to face.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very interesting, and I think obviously, with the recent events, I heard just this morning that the blackouts were going to last for at least a few weeks, and of course, as we get further into the winter, it makes sense that that type of material would be more necessary now. So someone is asking how, this is a comment, as Ukrainians living in Boston, we're grateful for your work and the work of your colleagues. How can we contact you? I'd be very happy to meet you in person. Maybe you can include your email address in the note that you sent to Elizabeth with the names of organizations, if you don't mind.
Yes.
That we have a small but enthusiastic audience if they contact you.
I will do that. I will be happy to get in touch.
And then another question. So wondering if there are artists that you know of that are working within and outside of Ukraine that you feel we should be aware of. And actually, if I can just jump in for a second as a follow-up to that excellent question, if there are exhibits that are taking place in Ukraine and that are perhaps somehow available virtually that we should know about. So, both living artists, but then also specific exhibits. Obviously, I cannot imagine actually how difficult it would be to organize an exhibit, but maybe there are still small events here and there taking place that
it happens. It happens time from time. It's a little bit harder right now to have money for operational costs such as virtual access to the expositions, as right now all of the funds are channeled to the surviving things. So I would strongly suggest that you find on Twitter Ukrainian art. It's called the Ukrainian Art or National Art Museum of Ukraine, and you can see a lot of news about Ukrainian art there. Excuse me. And to speak about Ukrainian artists, I can say that mostly, most part is working in a very excessive of volumes. They are, because otherwise you will just get crazy from all of this news that we're living, all the stories of people that we're living through every day, literally. They work a lot, and there is a lot of war art. And there are a lot of Ukrainian artists are mostly in Europe, because there are different residentials and other things created to support artists. And in Europe, there are many exhibitions that were and are taking place. And to speak about Ukrainian artists, that would take another 45 minutes. And I will be happy to share that if there will be an time and possibility for that. Because that is also a very interesting story. But of course, it's Maria Kulikovskaya, it's Gamlet Zinkovsky, it's many Vlada Rauka, it's really many artists.
Yeah, maybe you can, in that email, maybe if you don't mind, also just to have you write an entire essay, include maybe 3 or 4 names that
okay.
That we could look up.
Sure.
Another excellent question from the audience. Do you know of any Ukrainian museums that have been looted by Russian forces?
Yes, actually many, especially Kherson and Berdyansk, Mariupol. In Mariupol, and one interesting thing about this war is that it is very transparent. It's very much covered in media and social media, and we can easily, like this, we can look the news that were shown in Russia, and we can see how they take this work of art from Ukrainian museum, how they put it into the truck with the plate, with the number of the truck they are loading it into, and how it is transferred to the Russian territory. So all of these war crimes with looting Ukrainian museums are very well documented. And I want to thank Russian propaganda for that. And I really hope that we will get that back. Unfortunately, there are many museums that we don't know of. There are many fascinating stories about how museum workers were resistant and trying to preserve their collection, to hide them, and how they were taken to custody, tortured. And it's another very complicated story about people who went through the occupation, the museum workers. And there is also a huge collection from Melitopol, the Golden Room, the Scythian gold, that a very prominent collection of exceptional works of art from 8th century, 9th century, it's 7th century. It's very important things that were extradited, that were taken to Russia also. And they do speak about it loudly.
So these are, rather than sort of accidentally hitting a museum, you're talking about deliberate looting of specific objects, collections, artists, right? Yeah.
Exactly. And also there is a lot of destruction going on. Same as it was in 2014, there is the same pattern. They access, especially when it comes to contemporary Ukrainian art, that is something they would deliberately destroy. And that is an interesting point of how museum workers were thinking about Red List, what we call the first wave of evacuation. And interesting that the Red List that we used to have before the war were still from Soviet Union, and it would all contain Russian art. And of course, we had to take another idea and to think like Russians, what will they want to destroy? So that would be the first thing we need to evacuate, not the most valuable art, not the most important art, but the art that is under the biggest threat. And there are also tons of materials on how works of art by contemporary Ukrainian artists were destroyed in the best way. The Nazis did it, the communists did it, Talibs did it, and whoever is involved in authoritarian regime and fascist regime, they would do that always. So it's a very planned assault on Ukrainian culture and all Ukrainian heritage. And part of it, they want to appropriate and make their own history, because that's how they built the history of Russian Federation. It's built on literally on Kiev, on Kievan Rus, and on the history of Ukraine, but they appropriate it and they try to make it their own. So part of the art they would appropriate and build their identity and history on it, but then they will destroy whatever doesn't fit their narrative, whatever is Ukrainian and whatever speaks about actually liberal values, about human rights, that doesn't fit the Russian narrative. They are against human rights. There are no human rights. The rights of Russian Federation citizens costs nothing. It's just nothing. That's how they kill us so easily, because it's not like Ukrainians mean nothing for them, even Russians mean nothing for them. And that's all comes in one package with the culture, the politics, the militaries, and the suppression of their even other nations inside Russia right now. And colonial policy, of course.
Thank you. Another great question from the audience. So I want to reiterate gratitude to you for speaking with us. Thank you again. One last question. I'm wondering what you think of the Western art conscience in light of what Ukraine is experiencing and demonstrating in the face of the war. What do you feel that we, students of art, professors, academics, and artists, can learn from what you're experiencing?
I think that first important part is the responsibility, and what is going on right now. We see that this is the price we have to pay. It will be very uncomfortable for us, the Ukrainians, fighting in this war. Some people will be dying, some people will be injured, and lives will be destroyed. But that's what we have to take in order to make sure that in future we are protected, because as you may know, whenever one person is not protected, no one is protected in this society. And that is when I think that this is very, very important to think about the future of United States, of the world, of what is going on everywhere. As I said today to Lana's students this morning, that in Ukraine, there is much more this sense of being ready to commit and to act and to lose a lot of comfort, but to make sure that we are free in the future, because that's the threats that we have today. And what is important right now to think about Ukraine in linked, not like something that is very far away and not related, but as something that is very much related to the United States, to what is going on here, to the right powers that are raising very much right here, to the other political things, and to be very, very loud and active, and to think about mobilizing, cooperation, being ready to cooperate, being united. Unity is very important. Being very united and communities that can act fast and make fast decisions, act fast into this, and to not to be blinded by propaganda. That is, I think that's the main thing. And also when I speak to museum directors and they ask if they are prepared in case of war with China, for example, I think the main message, that the main lesson that we've learned, if there is a talk about war, it might happen. And it's better to be prepared for it, both mentally, physically, and ideologically. I don't know how to put in words, but to think about what are you going to do if it is going to happen? What will be your role in it? What will you do? I think that is the important part. We are very much relied on our comfort, and it blinds us, unfortunately. I hope that I've managed to answer this question. It's very complicated, actually.
Yeah, I think that's a very important lesson. This is something that I remember saying to my students even last semester. It feels or it may feel like this war is very far, but the reality is it's, you know, we're all to an extent somehow involved in it. So it's a good reminder what you just said.
It's just the first case when, it's actually not the first case when there is a direct military assault on human rights, because they, authoritarian regimes, are fighting against human rights. And when there is again the assault against human rights, whenever one person in the community is not safe, everybody are not safe. And that's exactly what we see now in Russia, how they were all happy that this war is going on, and how right now they are reconsidering when there is a mobilization. And that is what we constantly heard from Russians. We are a side of politics. We're not interested in politics. This is politics, and we are not with politics. We're not related. We don't know what is going on over there. So it's not us. We are not responsible for whatever is going on. But the truth is that they are responsible, and it's about responsibility. They might be not guilty directly. It's not about guilt. It's about responsibility. And whenever you try to side from politics and think that it's not related, it will eventually come for you. And it might get you killed eventually. It gets that simple, living or dying. That's what's going on right now. But that is the fight that is going on everywhere. We see it in Europe, we see it in the United States. We see how this fight against human rights is happening between authoritarian regimes and human rights. It's not even democracy. It's not about liberal values. It's about human rights.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from the audience? Okay. Well, Oleksandra, thank you so much for your time, for your insights. And we're all looking forward to your email with not only the resources, but the Ukrainian artists that we should be paying attention to, any exhibits that you know of that we can see at least virtually, and of course your contact information. Thank you again, Elizabeth. Thank you to all of you for coming. And I hope that this conversation will continue on the BU campus and beyond in the future.